Hi, I'm Richard. I lead New Life Church. And today we continue our journey through Exodus, the book of Exodus, looking at chapters 20 to 24. God has delivered the Israelites from Egypt. They've survived the first wanderings in the desert, and now they're moving towards their goal of becoming a nation whose purpose is to obey and worship God, and that will bless all other nations. But to get them there, they need to be trained. And these chapters really get this training process underway. And the first part of this process is the Ten Commandments. Well, they're typical of law codes of that time. Conquering kings would lay out their plans. First there was a law code. Then there was a list of rewards for obedience, so blessings. And there were threats for disobedience, so curses. They're a bit like the terms and conditions on your gas contract or mobile apps. Not that many of us have ever read them. Well, the Ten Commandments have a similar format. They're prefaced with a reminder of who God is. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. That's verse 2. And the first commandment follows straight on from that with an implied therefore. You shall have no other gods before me. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. The second commandment shows this blessing and curse format. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or in the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Here comes the curse, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. And now the blessing, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's verses 4 to 6. There you go. A curse to punish disobedience and a blessing for obedience. But unlike the other dry legal codes of its time, Exodus embeds these laws in a narrative, a story as to what God is doing and creating. God is forming family. Israel starts as a nuclear family, Abraham's. It grows and expands into a group of 12 tribes in Egypt, becomes a nation under Moses, a monarchy under Saul and David, and later still a Jewish people group that survives another exile. Finally, it becomes the family of those who believe and trust in Jesus in the New Testament. If you're married, you'll have done the same. When I first married Helen, we had still to work out how we lived together well. We had a few principles. It's a partnership. We support each other. I play to my strengths and Helen plays to hers. The washing was hers. She could be relied on not to mix the whites and colours to produce greys. The car, its repair and filling it with petrol are entirely mine. And some responsibilities in the partnership shifted over time. I started off doing most repairs until we realised that Helen was a lot more competent at them than me. A member of the church asked me to cut a worktop for her, which I did rather well. I'm okay at carpentry. She was so impressed that she asked me to free her stopcock. Plumbing is definitely not a strength. So I took a wrench to it, and as the turny bit came off in my hand and I tried to plug the hole with my finger, I'm yelling, "Helen, ring Peter, and fast!" We formed a base for our family life together. And in the same way, God gives the Israelites rules for good family life. The Bible and the Ten Commandments never say, I'll be your God if you do X and Y. It's never about fulfilling a set of rules. Most religions and law codes do operate that way, but not the Bible. It says, I'm your God and you're my people. It starts with ownership and identity. God says that your identity comes from your relationship with me. Now, given that identity, this is how you should live. First, God saves, and that's the narrative of the first 15 chapters of Exodus. And then God gives laws in response, rules for his family members to live by out of their relationship with him. I work a lot with the Winter Night Shelter in Milton Keynes. We started off providing resources, overnight accommodation. Then, as we built relationships and the guests trusted us, we added to the provision support to help people into longer-term accommodation and to find jobs. Homelessness is about poverty. The first needs we were addressing were about poverty of resources. And then as we built friendships, we started to address poverty of relationships. And as our guests learned to address their relationships, it left them in a better place to access resources. Over time, government has more and more moved into provide the resources, which is the easy bit for it to do, because it can just throw money at providing accommodation, benefits and so on if it chooses to. We found ourselves concentrating more on the relationship part, building friendships, addressing loneliness and helping people acquire new relating skills that over time made it easier for them to access resources. But over time we realised that there was a third level of poverty, the poverty of identity. When people get their identity in the wrong place, telling themselves they're useless or hopeless and will never amount to anything, it fuels the poverty of relationships and ultimately the poverty of resources. When people address their identity, it positions them for relationship and easier access to resources. So, we found ourselves working more and more with the issues of identity. God makes it easy for those who will listen to him. He starts with identity, with ownership. I am your God and you are my people. And out of that comes relationship, and that in turn leads to ease of accessing resources. The Old Testament narrative is equally preoccupied with this narrative of identity. God develops his family, and you as part of it, so that if you believe and trust in Jesus, you too can get your identity from your relationship with him, or should get your identity from that. Put another way, the context is that of the other nations and law codes around, but the narrative is very different. The obedience is not the way you earn favour, but the consequence of relationship. So let's read out the remaining 8 commandments. Number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. 4, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 5, honour your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. 6, you shall not murder. 7, you shall not commit adultery. 8, you shall not steal. 9, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. And finally 10, you shall not covet. That's chapter 20, verses 7 to 17 of Exodus. Actually, the 10 Commandments present a back and forth pattern, and they're pretty ambiguous. What does it mean to rest on the Sabbath or to honour your parents? Are they ironclad laws, or is there wriggle room? Can you steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family? Can you shoot someone invading your home? The first 4 are all about your relationship with God. The second 6 are about your relationship with other people. And that's why Jesus summarised the 10 Commandments as love the Lord your God and love your neighbour as yourself. Number 5, honouring your parents, is the first one that carries a promise. There's something special about honouring parents, whatever they've done. Even when you can look back and spot all the defects in what they put into you and put you through, be careful about how you describe it. And do find ways to honour your parents, whatever gaps or bad practices you can now see. You want to live long? Find ways to honour your parents. The law always assumes that there are alternative gods out there. Yahweh is one of many choices, and it's just as true today as it was then. Drugs, money, body image, football, Everton, you name it. There's a God available to love, serve and obey. Good things can become gods if they gain more than their rightful place. Food, exercise, even family. The next 3 chapters of Exodus amplify these laws. The interesting point is that they move back and forth between social and religious requirements. And an example of that interplay is where the religious regulation, keep the Sabbath, has immediate social implications so that slaves and resident aliens can rest. That's chapter 23, verse 12. This section includes one of the most quoted laws. If there's serious injury, you're to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so on. It sounds over the top and vengeful to modern ears, but its purpose was to ensure that punishment matched but never exceeded the crime. So that's my first half, how God builds his family and uses the 10 Commandments to train his family how to live. But as well as giving rules for family life, God develops interaction and relationship and intimacy with God. And this is the second part, which I've called, Will You Go Up the Mountain? And for this, I'm going to draw a little more widely on the book of Exodus. Well, there are 4 levels of intimacy. And as we go through these 4 levels, please ponder where people you know may be at. The first level of intimacy, fire insurance policy. Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 to 6. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, This is what you're to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you're to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you'll be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's the first stage, and it was a law relationship. If you do this, I'll do that. And that's the extent of the relationship that most of the Israelites wanted. It worked out in this way. Exodus chapter 20 from verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself and we will listen, but don't have God speak to us or we'll die." Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of the God will be with you to keep you from sinning." It was a test, and it revealed two characteristics of this first level of intimacy. First, their orientation towards God was about avoiding punishment. They avoid hell. They have their fire insurance, and that's all they want. They go on living their lives with little interest in a relationship with God. Who wants to approach a consuming fire? They preferred a second-hand relationship or experience with God. Their question is there a God? Their answer is to take out an insurance policy and to want nothing more. They've not grasped that there's no fear in love because perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment. That's 1 John 4:18. The question is, what does it take to move someone on from this first level of intimacy? Well, the second level of intimacy is encounter, but without transformation. Exodus chapter 24, 9 and 10. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. And under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. So the 70 go up the mountain. Note how rapidly the numbers tail off from the million plus of the previous level. They had an encounter with God, the God of Israel, but they slid back down the mountain. They were told to wait whilst Moses and Joshua went further up, but they tired of waiting. Exodus chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." So their temptation is to think that they can buy their way out and stay in control. Well, money can't end the poverty of the soul, and they were unwilling to wait on God to go further. Everything should change when we enter into a relationship. And at this level, people are through the fear, but they're not yet willing to invest for intimacy. Their question is God relevant? Their answer is to fulfill their obligations and to go about their business. And the question is, what helps people reach the point of becoming willing to invest in a relationship with God? Well, then we get to the third level of intimacy, investing in building relationship. Exodus 24, 12 and 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I'll give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I've written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. Moses and Joshua went up the mountain and remained. And we see the outcome, Exodus 33 from verse 10. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. And then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. People at this level are investing, and they want to remain. This is like students who want relationship, not just information, and stay on at the end of class to talk to the teacher, to build relationship. Another example is Elisha in 2 Kings 2, who's invited by the sons of the prophets twice to remain behind, but he wants relationship and presses on with Elijah. Well, we can only go so far with our parents and our friends and our mentors. There comes a time when we have to launch out on our own for our own relationship. And that's a personal decision. The question is, what can we do to encourage a person to invest in that relationship, to press in further? And that brings me to the final fourth level of intimacy, face to face with God. Finally, only Moses remained up the mountain and face to face with God. Well, what enables this level of intimacy? There are 4 issues that constitute a challenge for each of us. Number 1, humility. Moses was raised in the court of Pharaoh and sought to set God's people free in his own strength by killing an Egyptian. He fails and spends 40 years in the wilderness. He sees the burning bush, burning with God's resources, his will, to set his people free. Humility is letting God work through us to achieve his purposes. And the end result for Moses is Numbers 12, verse 3. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Secondly, freedom from selfish ambition. God offers to make Moses a great nation in Exodus 32. But Moses was more concerned about God's reputation than his own. But Moses sought the favour of the Lord his God, it says. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger. Relent and do not bring disaster on your people. Moses didn't want to build his own kingdom. There was no selfish ambition there. Finally, 4, having the right goal. Moses had the right goal, that of leading 5 million of God's people into freedom. And unlike his early efforts when he killed an Egyptian, he now does it from a place of rest, reliance and dependence on God and seeking God's ways. Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me. You've said, I know you by name and you've found favour with me. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favour with you. Remember that this nation is your people. And the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And at the end of Moses' life, his eye was not dim, nor his vigour abated, it says in Deuteronomy 34:7. Knowing God and his ways brings rest to our souls. And by this stage, Moses is thoroughly relying on God and doing all he did in God's strength and not his own. It's a wonderful place to be, but it takes a lot of investment to get there. And finally, 4, the last one's 3, to desire to see God glorified. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. It transformed Moses and his countenance radiated the glory of God. We'll unpack that further in a future week. The question is, are we so willing to pay the price necessary to achieve humility, freedom from selfish ambition, alignment with God's will, and a desire to see God glorified, that we can reach this level of relationship? So in conclusion, God's desire is to build family. God forms his family based on 2 priorities, loving God and loving people. That's why our church's vision is to be a community that loves God and loves people. He sets out the law to enable and to equip the people of Israel to do just that. The first 4 commandments of the 10 are focused on loving God, which is our first priority, and the later 6 commandments are focused on loving others, our second priority. And the following chapters expand on these laws, but all have that same focus. God is always and has always been focused on our hearts. It's important for us to understand God's intention and purpose for these laws. God initiates a covenant relationship with Israel. He starts with the subculture of forming family, and out of that he reaches out. God chooses the few and uses them to reach the many. God's desire is always to reach the nations. People are looking for connection, and God is offering that connection with something far bigger than themselves. You see, you can only lead others where you've been yourself. So I find myself devoting more and more of my time and energy to growing my faith to achieve a deeper level of intimacy so I can lead people there. So there are those 4 levels of intimacy. The first level, an fire insurance policy, where the question is there a God? Where they still fear, but please recognise that there's no fear in love. The second level of intimacy is encounter, but without transformation. They want encounter, but they're insufficiently invested for it to touch or change them. Their question is God relevant? The third level of intimacy is real investment in building relationship. Moses and Joshua went up the mountain and remained. And people at this level are investing, and they want to remain. They're putting themselves out to go deeper. And then finally, that 4th level of intimacy, face to face with God. These are the rare people willing to pursue the humility, freedom from selfish ambition, alignment with God's will, and really desire to see God glorified, and are willing to pay a significant price for that. And if you want to read further on this subject, I warmly recommend a book called The Core of Christianity by Neil Anderson, especially from page 118 onwards. So there you have the 10 commandments and their purpose. God's forming his family as a nation in relationship with him. He longs for that relationship and intimacy with you as a part of his family. And my questions for you to ponder this week are, number 1, which of the 10 commandments do you struggle to obey fully? 2, how far are you willing to invest in a relationship with God? 3, are you only after a fire insurance policy? Or do you seek encounter? Are you willing to let those encounters start to transform you? Are you willing to surrender all and to be fully invested in a deep relationship with God? And then, now number 3. What, if anything, hinders you from going any further up the mountain into a deeper relationship with God? So let me pray for you. Father, I thank you that you want relationship with us. I thank you that you form family with us. I thank you that you look to build and form your family so that we, the few, can reach the many really effectively. And Father, I pray that you will bless all the people who are listening into this and give us the ability and the opportunities to touch and reach out to others and to touch the lives of others. Help us to be a blessing to others. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.